Okay, so Aoibheann NicGhiolla Bhuí has done her dissertation in mental health struggles that GA players are facing today, and she joins us on this show today. How are you doing, Aoibheann?
Good, thank you. How's all with you, Kevin?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. This is an interesting topic. I suppose we were talking last week about a book you brought out based on your dissertation, and I just thought it'd be a really interesting thing to bring you on the show and discuss because I guess for GA players, especially nowadays, there's a lot going on when it comes to playing the game, the demands on them, and then you have everything else outside of that as well in terms of work and life and stuff like that. It's a pretty interesting topic. Have you found just from talking to people when you were putting this together and working on your dissertation for the last while that this is something that people really resonated with?
100%. And I suppose, the book is based on the dissertation that we came out with in 2023. So that would have been from my undergraduate in psychology at UCD. And, even at the time of doing that dissertation and putting out the survey, there was so much support coming from GA players, sending it into their group chats all over the country. And the response we got to that was amazing. Over 100 athletes actually filled out that survey for us. So the response we were getting from people on that was, this is something that needs to be spoken about. The mental aspect of the games, there's a lot of chat around it, but how do these people actually want to be supported going forward? And how can, coaches, stakeholders actually support these people who are struggling, to balance work, college life, all of that, traveling to training, all of that. So it was something that people really, I suppose, resonated with. Um, and yeah, so that was kind of what the perception was at the time.
So, what was it that originally made you interested in this topic as well? What was the kind of thing that pushed you towards studying this?
So I suppose the dissertation would have been done in 2023, and the year previous then would have been 2022. And unfortunately, we would have lost a member of our school community and a huge impactful role model in the GA in my area, Red Oak Murphy. And he would have been a huge influence on GA players and then also the younger community. When I seen, the impact of Red Oak's death that it really had on the wider community, it really raised the question of, what type of pressures and mental pressures that these athletes are experiencing and what are we not seeing. When you have someone who's so influential, and I would have seen Red Oak, he would have came into rooms and into restaurants, and I could see everybody turn and look at him. I remember thinking that one time when we were in a local restaurant, everybody turned and wanted, to speak to him. Such a hugely
Mm.
influential player, and who always had a smile to give to anybody who was there. So I suppose that kind of raised the question of what is the mental aspect of the games like, and is there anything that we can do to help better support our players? Because they really are, like Red Oak, pillars of our community, and it's so important that these players are supported in any way they can.
Yeah, because I actually, when I worked as a sports journalist, I remember interviewing Red Oak just after he came back from Australia, and just really like a really likable person and a really genuine guy. So I think it, at the time when he passed, like it was fairly hard hitting, like for everyone around the country, but obviously then for people that knew him, must have been really difficult. But I guess like his family have kind of they've taken on his legacy. They're doing a lot of work in the area of mental health as well, and this is probably another small area where ultimately his passing has kind of created a legacy in this area, and hopefully then it will help people down the line as well. So fair play for doing that. I think it's nice to remember his name in that way as well when you're putting together something like this.
100%, and absolutely his family have done a huge amount of work and they're absolute role models for that trajectory of mental health being included as part of the Gaelic Games rather than something that we're shying away from and going against such huge influential people, and fair play to them for deciding to go down that path and speak about it.
And just talk to me then about your background in terms of your studies. I know you are doing a master's at the moment, but just talk to me about your undergrad and then the kind of work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose my undergrad would have been in psychology, and so that was with UCD, and that was kind of the more general aspect of mental health that I was interested in. And I would have done a good few modules around neuroscience and the likes of that as well, and sports psychology as well. So kind of great varied interest, I suppose, at the time of studying, and of course, my love of the GA and everything like that fed into the sports psychology and performance side of things. So I suppose I would have finished that master's then, that undergrad in 2023. Took a break for a while, working, saving up money, everything like that. I would have done HR management, which would have been kind of, again, interested in people and their behavior and how we work, everything like that. And at the moment, then I would coach neurodiverse young adults who are entering and integrating into the workplace. So I suppose it all feeds back to how people work, how we can help them. That would be where my interests lie in it.
Mm. And whereabouts are you from then? And have you much of background in GA? Did you play much at all?
Yeah, so I'm from Sligo. I would have had an interest in GA growing up. I would have played myself, would have coached at cool camps, all of that. So I suppose I really see GA as like, the cornerstone of every rural community. I think it's something that resonates with people, across Ireland, and it's something that you can like carry with you abroad. And athletes will find themselves, being brought abroad, to play football and everything like that. So I suppose it was always part of growing up was that, the GA was like the hub of the community. And then as we got older, people take on different roles in the GA and become real, role models for those who are younger than us. So I suppose it's all kind of been part of my life, and, going to train and everything like that would have been part of your week, and looking forward to it more than anything, seeing everyone, spending time with them and having fun more than anything was how we operated when we were young.
And I'm interested in your time in UCD. There'd be a lot of GA players in UCD, obviously, who would take the sport very seriously, would be travelling back home, especially out west, to play club and especially intercounty. But was that something that you would have noticed when you were studying there initially, the kind of commitment and maybe also the stress and the type of toll that it would have taken on certain individuals?
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of part of the reason why we decided to do, the dissertation on the subject of, the stress and the psychological aspect of the games, because I was seeing, people who were managing really intense courses such as, radiology, and then traveling home 4 hours in the middle of the week and up back again to college, and then they'll do college training, and then they might go home to a part-time job, and yet they're still trying to maintain, the 2-1 average, all of that. There's so much different things going on. So I always kind of admired, the people who are really, talented, I suppose, with the GA, but also the level of commitment there that's required. And I suppose it got me wondering then, what's it like to actually manage the mental side of it, the thoughts that I'll have to go home now, 4 hours drive, 4 hours back up, and then do it all again. Worry about the college work, worry about work, everything like that, So that really interests me, that side of things.
Yeah, and it's something I've done myself when I was in college, and even living in Dublin and driving down home to play. Like, it is, just from talking to other players, it's a massive stressor. And then if you throw, say, a busy job into that, a demanding career, and then maybe a family, maybe you've kids, all of a sudden then your time is so limited in terms of if you're wasting, an hour and a half, 2 hours up and down on the road every 2 or 3 evenings to get back for games and stuff like that. It's probably it's a really unique thing, I would say, to the GA and to Ireland as well, that you have these players making long commutes and not actually transferring clubs. They will still play with their home club. You still have that tie to the home club as well. But I'd say that was something that was really striking for you then when you kind of did this study. Can you just talk about the study maybe in general and maybe the main findings and anything that might surprise you from it?
Yeah, no worries at all. So I suppose the study set out to kind of investigate if psychological flexibility levels could influence, were associated with the stress perceived by the GA players, and then the individual stressors experienced by the GA players. So I'll just talk a bit about what psychological flexibility actually is, because it's one of these mental health words that we throw out, but what actually does it mean, to everybody? So I suppose psychological flexibility is like your ability to engage with the present moment and accept any thoughts as they come and face the new challenge that you're about to go into. So it's that ability to take a breath in the moment and see there's outside noise here, there's thoughts racing, worrying. I'm about to take a free kick here, and it's the last kick of the game. What's going on? Am I able to accept that I may kick this and it might go one way? What might happen? To be able to maintain that focus and keep going in the face of it. So really looking at that side of things, and how does it actually associate with the stress perceived by GA players. So what we actually found was that the more psychologically flexible you were, the less stress you perceived. So the more mentally grounded and strong you are, the less stress you perceived, regardless of the amount of stress that was coming in your life. And I suppose that really speaks to people, because the more mentally strong you are, the more you're well equipped to go into that match, to take that pass, to look and see where you want that pass to go. If it goes to someone else, if it goes, out, what do you do then? How do you react, and how will it impact the rest of your game? Let's say even the rest of your evening. How do you speak to yourself after that? So looking at that side of the games really gives you a bird's eye view on how it can actually affect your whole day, your whole week, your whole self-talk. So important.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, like that is interesting. So every player will feel the same pressure, right? But then the players that can make it to the very top are the ones who can actually feel a bit calmer, maybe in the moment, and it doesn't inhibit them as much. Would that kind of make sense?
100%. And what it is as well is the idea of failure to people, the idea of having to keep being the best and to be perfect all the time and to get the right thing. It's a huge amount of pressure. There's no room for error there. And that's why they kind of speak about, let's say, perfectionism and leaning towards that, having to stay and be the best. It really is high functioning anxiety, because we're afraid something will go wrong, and if something goes wrong, then we lose all sense of ourselves. So the idea of psychological flexibility is a complete flip side of that. It's accepting, okay, something went wrong there. Let's see what else I can do. Turn, have another go, have another kick, giving yourself that bit of an inch. And I suppose the self-compassion piece there, so important for people.
Yeah. So just going back to say the main findings, so that was obviously a big thing. Players with better psychological flexibility are the ones who are better able to cope with the demands.
Yes.
You also found around just the demands on GA players, I think you would have used the term unsustainable. Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah. So I suppose, as we mentioned before, there's so much involved in the life of a GA player. And I use the term GA player, I'm referring to, female GA players, I'm referring to camogie, hurling, football, all of that box in there. But these athletes are playing at such a high level and committing such a high amount of time to the sport, yet they're expected to, maintain a full-time job, maintain college work, maintain all other aspects of the game, yet stay committed. And oftentimes there's actually protective factors, such as, let's say, social connection, that are endangered by the GA. So we'll say, for example, drinking bans. Even the idea of the word ban, it's labeling as something as absolutely bad, cannot do it. And, that for some people might be, going to the pub, meeting their friends on a Friday night. That could be a huge outlet for them. So in terms of the demands, it's like unsustainable in that manner, because they're expected to keep going and to keep performing at such a high level, but we're not actually supporting them in the mental side and what actually helps them, and how we can actually alleviate some of the pressure off these players.
Yeah, definitely. Another finding that you found was around, I think you might have just referenced it in your study, but the dropout rate in GA, especially for 16 to 24-year-olds, then was around 52%. When you compare that with soccer, it's 23%. So it's almost double the dropout rate. What do you think is the reason for that?
So I would say the mental demands of the game, have a huge amount to answer in that way. We speak about the GA, and it's so culturally woven into our DNA, really. It's this pressure to serve, I suppose, our community, to be part of that team, to show up. And oftentimes the noise of that and the restrictions around, let's say, the social life can really impact people. And some people just say, I can't be expected to do this anymore. And it's that lack of support there, I suppose, on the side of things, that really lead people to drop out.
Mm. And just going back to the psychological flexibility thing, because this is probably, it's probably a new term for a lot of players. If they're listening to this now, they won't have, they won't have heard it before, really. But if you're talking about if a player wants to make it to the top, then this is kind of a key skill that they need to develop. Is it a trainable skill? Is there certain things that a player could do that would help it improve, or what would your recommendations be around that?
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose a huge amount of it goes back to our self-talk. How do you speak to yourself in that moment when that pass goes wrong, or you miss how do you speak to yourself? Do you ground yourself and say, right, next one, let's go? Or is it, geez, I can't believe I've done that now. I can't believe I acted that way at training. I can't believe I let that impact me. And all of these thoughts cloud our ability to be in that present moment. So I suppose for players, something that arcs you to that present moment. So it could be like a visual trigger, it could be something, some people, for example, have like, will put a little red dot on their hand, or they might just even pinch these two fingers together. That's something that you can do to regulate yourself straight away. And it's something that will just bring you back to that present moment and allow you to actually assess the situation from that bird's eye view.
Yeah, and I've heard other players, they would wear, say, a band around their wrist, and if they make a mistake, then they just pull it, and it kind of, again, it just, I guess, brings you back to the present moment. When we're talking about, like, say, if you're at a GA match and you hear someone shouting from the crowd, or you hear criticism of players saying they're just not mentally tough or they're mentally weak, does that come back to that psychological flexibility thing? Like, is that a thing, like mentally weak players, or what are your thoughts around that?
So I suppose the term mentally weak, is it fully a weakness, or is it something that we can actually choose to look at and to strengthen at a club level, to really sit those players down and say, what can we actually help you with? Whether it be goal setting, reflecting, looking at that self-talk. Because to me or you, if I say something to you like, you're not good enough, that might be water off your back. But to another player, that could really affect their whole day and how it actually impacts their game and everything like that. So it's that building up that mental strength of, I can trust myself to react in that moment and to look at the resources I have and say, let's go this way. I mightn't listen to that noise. I'll go this way instead. It's that building up that trust with yourself from the side of being psychologically flexible.
Yeah, so when we talk about, say, the dropout rate, and just going back to that, and athlete burnout is a big thing, and I guess athlete burnout can be a psychological thing as well as a physical thing. So is it just when a player is dealing with that chronic stress for a number of years, and say they're driving up and down the road from college, they're missing out on a lot of things, maybe a bit of a social life in college, they're feeling under pressure to perform with their club team at home. Is that a big reason then as well for players actually giving up the game?
Absolutely. So I suppose it's kind of the outside noise, as we spoke about, and the lack of ability to kind of trust yourself and to keep moving forward with it. So I suppose stigma has a huge amount to do with it in mental health, especially in Ireland. We're still kind of moving away from that stigmatized subject. So I suppose if you've grown up as an athlete who's always been seen, to be the best at your position in your little area, there's that expectation and that weight of it being on you, and that holds a huge bearing as we grow up and we have all these other outside stressors such as work, college life, all of that. There's still that inherent expectation to be and continue to be the best, but with no resources, no resources to actually strengthen that mental resilience. And I suppose a huge aspect around it is, let's say, with injury, your identity could be really tied to being the best player at that position. And then all of a sudden that's gone. And then it's, who am I without that sport? Who am I without being able to play and be the best? So it's that mental support that they need, from coaches, from stakeholders, from the team as a whole, to say that, no, we're actually a team here and let's work together on this to strengthen that. Because it's the time where they're most vulnerable, I suppose, athletes, is when they're injured. And how do they come back from that? And that's where psychological flexibility comes in. And it's actually been found to be a protective factor for injury, is being able to be psychologically flexible.
And what about the role then of social media as well? I know it's something you would have referenced. It's obviously a lot of the people who took part in your survey would have been between the ages of 18 to 24. They are probably, they grew up with social media. Maybe my generation, we probably had a period of time without that when we were younger. It's obviously linked, I think you mentioned, to lower well-being and performance anxiety. How big a role is that playing in all of this as well?
Yeah. So I suppose social media, that side of things, it's something that's not very natural to us as humans, that we shouldn't really have this amount of access to other people's lives and to comparing ourselves to them and everything like that. And I suppose with social media and, let's say, elite athletes, so intercounty players, you can go onto any of their pages and you can see a number of horrific comments after a match on how they believe that the player played and all of that. And depending on how psychologically flexible that player is, they could really internalize a lot of them comments that come in. And I suppose it's looking at social media as that comparison tool, and it's looking at when does it actually start to, lean the other side? When are we being used by social media? When does that come into it rather than us using it for leisure?
What would your recommendation be? The vast majority of players, I would imagine, are not going to just give up social media, but do you have any advice, especially for younger players? What could they do, maybe even around games, to help them perform better?
So I suppose definitely limiting the amount of time that they can spend on it, or just looking at when does it start to feel like this is impacting me and being something that I'm being used by rather than something that I'm just willingly engaging. When do I feel myself doom scrolling? What else is there I could do? Is there a few friends I could text to go around and kick a ball around at the local pitch? Because something like that is so much better for our mental health in terms of social connection than doom scrolling and seeing these wonderful lives that everyone seems to be living. Because it is that huge highlight reel, and something like social connection, actual human connection, is a protective factor in all this. So leaning on that, kicking a ball around like you did when you were young. We seem to forget all of them little things that used to help us. So leaning back on that, kind of simple pleasures of life, so important.
Yeah, and I think there are studies as well coming out that show, say, use of a phone before a game, it does reduce your reaction time as well. So that's obviously really important as well. Just moving on to difference between genders, did you expect to see differences, and what did you actually find between male and females then?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one for us. I suppose we predicted that we may see differences in psychological flexibility and stress levels in male and female athletes. Um, I suppose around gender and the GAA, the perceived imbalance of, I suppose, resources, let's say attendance at games, all of that. We thought that that may play into how male and females perceive that stress. Now, we actually found no significant difference in psychological flexibility or stress levels between male and females. What we did find was a difference in the type of stressors experienced by male and female athletes. So that was kind of an interesting one for us. And I can kind of go into perhaps them stressors if you would like there, Kevin,
Yeah,
to
definitely.
differentiate. Yeah. So I suppose dealing with management was one of the stressors listed by participants, and 43% of females listed that to be a stressor compared to just 26% of males. So that was an interesting one for us, that the thoughts of going to management with issues or, perhaps any conflict, 43% of females that resonated with versus only 26% of males. So that's an example of one. Another would be 55% of females cited college work as a stressor, compared to 33% of males. And what I found interesting about that was that male intercounty athletes are 3 times more likely to fail a college year than their peers. So that was from
Right,
a
that's
study
interesting.
that we had looked at for the literature review segment. But that got us thinking around, is there a perceived imbalance between the emphasis that males maybe put on college work sometimes compared to females? They identify it as a stressor, they see that it's stressful. And I suppose that brings up the thoughts of like, could the GA better support male intercounty athletes with the academic side of things and alleviate some of that pressure? Because ultimately, we do see it leads to them being 3 times more likely to drop out or fail a college year than their peers.
Right, that's really interesting. And just following on from that, like I think you found that males would have had more difficulty with time management as well versus females.
Yes, yeah. So females identified that to be a stressor also, but males would have struggled with it in a larger capacity. And it's interesting that they cite that kind of as a stressor in it, compared to, let's say, the college work side of things. It wasn't actually listed, but the idea of time management, a more general thing, they were able to identify, oh God, I do actually struggle with that, So there is an awareness there that there is an imbalance of time and organizing everything. But when it came down to actually listing, like, that's a stressor for me, the college work, it didn't resonate as much for the males.
Yeah, and just I might be asking you to interpret data here that you don't have, but when you're talking about the females having a poor relationship with coaches, would any of that come into play that there tends to be a lot more male coaches in the women's game, especially probably when you go up through the inter-county ranks and maybe at the higher level of college and even clubs. Do you think, would that be a reason for that as well, that females might find it a bit more difficult to deal with males who are in coaching and management positions?
Yeah, it absolutely could be. And again, it's something that we've not explicitly researched, so I couldn't comment on it in that sense.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right in the sense that there is an imbalance in genders at coaching levels, let's say, as we get higher and higher in the ranks. And perhaps it could be a case that females would feel more dismissed when they go to management. Perhaps there's a lack of rapport there sometimes. They don't want to be a burden. All of this can really come into play with female athletes, not wanting to be a burden or to bring up certain things.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things I found from this, and as a coach, was around the importance of having a good team culture, and that actually a good culture makes a lower stress environment for all of the players. If it's a poor culture, then just across the board, then the players will report feeling more stressed. So, do you want to dive into that a bit? Because as I said, I thought that was one of the most really fascinating bits that came up from your study.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we spoke about previously, social connection is a protective factor for mental health in general. So, when the players on the team feel all connected as one, it really does support their mental health and their ability to, I suppose, even recover and reflect on the game. So if it's the idea that players will all go down, for a drink after a match together, or, go do social activities together, so important for that team culture and building up that bond and rapport. And it also opens the doors on, more intimate conversations, let's say around mental health, and that they're able to have that with their teammates and actually sit down with their teammates and say, oh, well, actually, I found that really tough when there was people heckling on the sideline. How do you find that? So it's opening that conversation and releasing some of them barriers that are there. And that can be supported by coaches, like let's say after a match, just all sitting in a circle and actually reflecting on, was there highs, lows of that game? What did you struggle with? What can we help you with? Really opening that conversation with the team and seeing what they as coaches can provide and give to the team and what they actually need. And that, I believe, would release some of the barriers, let's say, faced by, let's say, the 43% of females who find it difficult to deal with and talk openly with managers.
Yeah, and even if you have a good environment, the players are more likely to keep coming back year after year, so it's a snowball effect really, isn't it? The fact that if players are, feeling supported by management, feel they can speak up, feel it's a really good culture and a good group to be involved with, then they're obviously more likely to come back and to want to keep playing and keep committing and putting in the time that they have to put in to play with the team.
Yeah, absolutely. It supports all of that. Team culture is so important for attention in the games.
So you've had a few recommendations. Like if I was to say to you that, you wake up tomorrow and you're hired by the GPA and they say, Aoibheann, we want you to help players in this regard, put a program in place or whatever it is. What kind of things would you go after? I know it's a hard thing to do with the amount of players that are out there and stuff, but is there any kind of areas that you would try and go after?
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose a big one would be supporting the mental aspect of the games as much or at least half on par with what you support the physical side of the games. So most teams will have access to, physios, things like that. But what about access to psychotherapists? What about access to sports psychology? What about access to mental health welfare workshops for the whole team? What about access to suicide prevention programs for coaches, for teams? There's so much that can be done there. I mean, if we think of any company that you're hired by, your company will have to have an EAP. So that's an employee assistance program whereby you can access counselling. And I suppose players, we found that in the literature that players give 28 to 30 hours of their weeks to GAA. So that might be going to the gym, traveling, sessions, all of that. But it's cumulatively about 30 hours. So that's the same as, a part to full-time job when we think about it. So supporting the mental aspect of the games, investing in counselling services. There's one called Off the Pitch that has been launched, I believe, in the past 2 years, and they do great work surrounding like counselling services for clubs, and they can fund that for their club members. So the likes of supporting the mental aspects of the games in the same light that you would the physical side.
Yeah, and like you would have mentioned, we would have seen both the GA and the GPA talking about running these different awareness campaigns, which is great. But you kind of feel that you need to delve a bit deeper as well. And yeah, it's fine having awareness, but we need to actually have programs and systems in place to actually help players.
100%. And, coaches have a huge influence on players' lives. We grow up with coaches and we see them as God, really. When we're younger, we see them as, okay, we'll take the word, we'll go out and do our best because we want to see them be happy with the job we've done on the pitch. So coaches already can have like quite a high level of rapport with players. So what about doing something like suicide prevention training with them, coaches, and they can actually spot some of the signs that, oh, that person there might be struggling. So building these people up to be able to deal with the mental demands of their players, and to better, I suppose, equip them with being able to manage the team.
Yeah, because as you said, like the coaches do sort of create the environment and create the conditions for the players. So if I was to say that, you could have 5 minutes with every club coach in Ireland, what would you tell them to stop doing? Or maybe tell them, yeah, maybe just go with what would you tell them to stop doing? What is it that coaches do that would maybe quietly increase a player's stress?
So definitely being aware of the commentary you're giving to players, because players can be very vulnerable. They can really internalize some of that talk that you're giving to them. And if it really is negative, some of the time, there's a fine line between giving someone constructive criticism and a push, and you're actually now impacting on their well-being and the way that they're perceiving their own performance. So being mindful of the way they speak to the players is so, so important. Because you never know how someone could internalize that comment, and it could be something, quite small that you say at training in passing, but that could really affect how they go into the next training session or they go into their next day playing. So definitely raising that awareness around the way they're speaking to players, so, so important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just the last couple of ones for you. Like you touched on that ERSI study that was done in the GA, and they found that 30 hours a week figure is kind of what intercounty players are putting into the game, and it probably has even increased. I think that was maybe 10 years ago at this stage. That study, it could have been 2017. It's probably increased the demand since then as well. When you hear people talking about GA, and let's just talk about intercounty for a second, and it's an amateur game. What do you think when you hear that word amateur? Like, is it still an amateur game?
No, I don't believe it's still an amateur game. When you think about the amount of hours and commitment that is expected of players, whether it be a club or intercounty level, like as we spoke about, you could be in college in Dublin and travelling home to Donegal twice a week for training. Like that level of commitment is huge. And I think it's something that is really coming to play now, is that it really isn't an amateur game in the level that is expected of players. And there is a certain amount of that players obviously enjoy, playing for their home teams and not wanting to transfer clubs. That's part of what makes the GA what it is, that cultural tie to where you're from. But it's like, how can we actually support these players who are committing so, so much time and energy to these games?
Yeah, and say like you can work with players and they can develop that psychological flexibility that we touched on, but ultimately, like, is this just a rational response? If the players are putting so much time and they're commuting so much, they feel the pressure of these games, and they have very little downtime. They are under more pressure in their careers because of the time. Maybe they have to leave early to get back home for training. Is that just a rational response to the demands that they have? Like, is that just kind of par for the course? And yeah, maybe we can help psychologically a small bit, but it's going to be very hard to get rid of that fully, is it?
Exactly. And that's the point of psychological flexibility. It's not working against the stressor, it's working with it and deciding how can we alleviate some of this pressure. Because stress from life will always be there. We can't control that. We'll have bosses who we don't get on with, or we'll have family conflict, all of that outside noise. So that's where psychological flexibility comes in. It's moving with the stressor and alleviating some of the pressure and saying, okay, I've missed this pass. What can I do now? Where can I go? It's giving yourself that bit of standstill in the road that you can actually pause for a minute, recuperate, and still keep going. Because the GA is grounded in resilience. When we think about it, we were banned by the British to play GA. Games were going on in secret. There's so, so much resilience there. And I suppose that barrier has been lifted. We're allowed to play the games now, but it's that mental resilience we have to continue to build up and to work with, not against.
And just before we finish, any other advice or recommendations you would have? Like we've touched on, say, the GPA, the GAA, we've touched on coaches, anything for players, how they can maybe interpret this data or things that might help them going forward?
100%. So some of the stressors that kind of came out, the self-reported stressors from players, I found it really, actually just trigger nearly to look at these stressors that these players were deciding to divulge in their study. So some of them might have been, not being good enough, being judged on how well you play, never being able to be the best. These are quite impactful statements, and if these are just some of the statements the players have actually gave out in the survey, I can't imagine the thoughts that are running around in their head 24 hours a day. So giving them thoughts somewhere to go, be it in a reflective journal, looking at going to counselling, all of them things, and just normalising that bit more, because absolutely everybody is affected by mental health, either directly or indirectly. And unfortunately, nowadays, we all know someone who has died by suicide. That's something that we have to acknowledge as well. So it's giving yourself the protective tools to help build up the mental side of the games rather than it being a burden. And as we said, some of that could be reflective journals, engaging in counselling, looking at your self-talk, huge one. Is it actually serving you? Goal setting, visualization, building up all of them tools as you would for strength and conditioning, yourself for going to the gym, all of that. You'd build up all these different aspects. But how can I strengthen and condition my brain to actually work with me in the game and outside of the game?
Yeah, I think that's something I would have touched on the past. I think it was Kelly Fahey who might mention it on this podcast before, but talking about with an S&C program, you're not just cramming the week of a county final, you're doing it over the course of the season, and then when it comes to the week of the game, you don't need to be fearful then, or you don't need to be overdoing it that week. You have all the work done over the weeks and months previous to that. Listen, that was brilliant. Do you want to just talk about the book then, where people can find it?
Absolutely. So I have the book here with me. So More Than the Match, along with my co-author Niall NicGhiolla Bhuí. So we have a beautiful book here. It's available on Amazon, paperback or ebook. It's quite short, comprehensive read. As we said, we discuss the results of the dissertation, all of the stressors listed, some recommendations for the GAA and stakeholders and how they could best improve, and I suppose recommendations for actual players on how they can improve and strengthen their own psychological flexibility. So yeah, that's where it's available, Amazon. And yeah, you'll get all of the data as well as kind of a backstory on psychological flexibility, the Gaelic Games. Great read for anybody who's interested in mental health, GAA, sport, how to improve their game, all of that. Because as we said, it is a silent killer, mental health, and not looking at that can really, really affect people further down the line.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll link that in the show notes as well. So anyone listening to this will be able to just scroll down and they'll be able to click on the link to find it on Amazon. But yeah, I went through it yesterday and it's a really good read. And I think players and coaches will get a lot from that as well. So listen, Aoibheann, thanks a million for coming on today, and best of luck with the rest of your studies.
Well, thank you so much. And the same to you. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been really lovely to chat to you. Thanks a million for having us on. And as obviously I'm a bit nervous, but that's only natural listening, being on this, but that's all right. Look, it is a worthy read. It's actually dyslexia friendly as well in terms of the read, so it's quite catered for everyone. So yeah, I'm glad to be able to speak out, and thanks so much for letting us use the platform to do so.